And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Monday early afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is Kurt Russell's 74th birthday. And Kurt Russell, most people know him as the kind of action star in the 80s and 90s, some of the great action movies of the era, and famously played Santa Claus in Christmas Chronicles, two of those movies which I haven't seen but are supposed to be very, very solid. The phrase that I heard a lot, especially with the first Christmas Chronicles, way better than I expected, much better than you expect. Some variation on that phrase. So Kurt Russell, some of you know this and some of you don't know this, he was a child star. I would say that in the history of performing arts, as far as movies, TV, he's probably the answer to the trivia question. Name somebody who went from a TV star, a child star, to a full-fledged global box office draw. Who's the first guy that you think of that made an almost seamless transition from child star, teenager, adult, and then started knocking out huge hit movies? The answer is Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell was what used to be called a contract player. That is a phrase that is not used anymore because the studio system is nothing like it was. They don't even call it the studio system anymore. But when you say contract player, it means that they are, I hate to refer to people as if they're cattle in the immortal words of Sir Alfred Hitchcock, but you belonged to a particular studio. So for example, Clint Eastwood, long before his days at Warner Brothers and Malpaso Productions, a going concern which produced his last film that he completed not that long ago, Juror Number 2, which I just talked about, fantastic. But Clint Eastwood was a contract player at Universal in the 50s. It meant that he could only work on projects produced by Universal unless he was specifically loaned out for something else, but nobody knew who he was, so that really wasn't going to happen. But Kurt Russell was not just any old contract player with a studio. Kurt Russell was the contract player at Disney. He made silly children's films, family movies for Disney, and his biggest supporter, this is true, and you can Google this, his biggest supporter in the business was none other than the Walt Disney. Literally, the Walt Disney was Kurt Russell's biggest supporter. In fact, one of the last conversations on record that Walt Disney had, he talked about the importance of keeping Kurt around. Kurt Russell made these kinds of goofy movies, such as The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, and he was a very likable screen presence. And at a certain point, he did this sort of turn. Now, I don't know the mechanics of how he was able to do this, because it's not as simple as, he just broke away from Disney. I mean, his contract could have been up. But he did a film where he played Elvis Presley. And he was kind of on the cusp of adulthood, or the sort of age where he would be taking on what you would call adult roles. Because when you think about some of the biggest stars who started, let's say, in their teens, such as Tom Cruise, such as Leonardo DiCaprio, after a certain point in time, DiCaprio couldn't play 18 anymore. You could say that it was a little bit of a push and a stretch of him at 18. Him playing Frank William Abagnale, who was supposed to be 16 or 17, but they did just enough subtle work with his hair, and he was very good with his mannerisms, coming across like a child. But that's what I'm talking about. Kurt Russell, after the Elvis Presley, I don't remember the name of it, but after the Elvis Presley movie, then he started making movies where he was playing adult characters. And by the time he did The Thing with John Carpenter in 1982, he didn't look like a kid anymore. No, he was already 30, 31 years old at that particular juncture. And there are certain kind of unanswerable, imponderable questions. But if I'm asked the question, who are the best living actors who have not been nominated for any kind of acting Oscar? The first guy I'm going to say is Dennis Quaid. Because Dennis Quaid, any number of times, could have drawn Best Supporting Actor or full-fledged Best Actor nomination. Quaid was so good in so many movies, just never quite got there. And in 2002, he had a ton of buzz for 2 movies. They thought he was going to be nominated for what was it? Was it Todd Field? I'm not sure. But the movie that he did with Julianne Moore. Strange, I don't remember it. It was sort of a Douglas Sirk. It was a melodramatic movie where he played the closeted husband of Julianne Moore's character, and there was a lot of Oscar buzz for supporting actor. But if you ask me, top 5 best performances of Dennis Quaid's career was in the movie The Rookie, which was, there was some buzz that maybe he would get lead actor. So the point is, in Kurt Russell's entire career, the only movie that I think he got best actor buzz was Miracle, the 2003 film. I talked about it not that long ago on the channel. I didn't really focus on Kurt's performance, but his almost impersonation, it was not really even an impression. He almost inhabited the body and soul of Herb Brooks, the former U.S. Olympic men's hockey coach who later coached the Rangers in the pros. But that's really the only film where Kurt, to my knowledge, got pretty heavy Oscar buzz, certainly for lead actor. And when you look at supporting actor, there are movies where if the films had been better received, for example, Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise, the Cameron Crowe film, Kurt plays a really interesting supporting role as Cruise's doctor in that film. The movie wasn't particularly well received. Now, if you ask me what's Kurt's best performance, his best performance comes in the incredible 1997 North by Northwest-esque thriller Breakdown. A Breakdown it's the sort of movie that I recommend for a lot of different reasons. Let's say, hypothetically, that somebody is tuning into this channel for the first time and they know who Kurt Russell is, but maybe they've only seen him in his older era. Maybe they love The Christmas Chronicles. And well, what else did this guy do? Wow, he was a child star. If you ask me to name one movie, if you say that you like sports films, I'm probably going to say Miracle. But if you say, give me one really good thriller or action movie that Kurt Russell was in, because apparently people are telling me that he was an action guy, I'm going to say Breakdown first. I don't love Escape from New York, another John Carpenter. I'm in the minority on this one, big time. I prefer Escape from LA. I think Escape from LA is fantastic. Escape from New York just doesn't work. It doesn't work for me at all. Escape from LA, though, is a film, and I'll get back to Breakdown in a second, but Escape from LA is in my top 5 if you were asking me, top 5 Kurt Russell films. The character that he plays, Snake Plissken. What a great name for a character, Snake Plissken, with 2 S's. Escape from LA bombed at the box office despite some major critics such as Roger Ebert and even Jack Matthews in New York Newsday back then loved it and thought it was superior to the original. In the case of Ebert, he didn't even think it was close. But in a, dare I say, post-COVID society, there is a plot thread in Escape from LA, and I'm going to have to spoil this somewhat because it's so good and it adds so much to the movie, and not really in a good way, but in a how these things roll around in our head kind of way now that it's 2025. So in Escape from LA, Snake Plissken has to undertake a quest. It feels like a conventional action movie, but it's kind of a quest movie where Snake has to go from place to place like a Lord of the Rings and do certain challenges, meet a whole bunch of different characters, some of whom are sympathetic and a lot of whom are not. But he has a ticking clock. He has a time limit because, according to the bad guys, he has been injected with a fast-acting poison that will kill him in, 36 hours. A little bit, speaking of Dennis Quaid, like DOA, where he's injected with a slow-acting poison, and Dennis Quaid, as he's dying, literally is trying to figure out who murdered him. It's kind of a wacky concept. But in a world of Escape from LA, there's Kurt Russell just fucking kicking ass. He's not actually having sex, but he's kicking ass and taking names But as the story progresses, he begins to feel weaker and weaker. He's nauseous. He's feverish. He's starting to maybe hallucinate a little bit. He's getting cuckoo. And we're like, well, of course he is. And why? Because he's dying. And spoiler alert, you get towards the end of the movie and you realize they didn't inject him with a slow-acting or even fast-acting poison. They injected him with the fucking flu. They injected him with the flu. But he felt like he was dying because why? When you have a really bad flu, you want to take a gun and blow your brains out because you don't want to continue to live as uncomfortable as you are. I've had full-blown flu twice, and both times, sayonara, let's come over, and if I weren't Jewish, let's do some last rites on me because I've got about 5 minutes and I am at the end here. So the angle of him being injected with the flu, it hits different. And when I found out that that's what it was, I was literally screaming. It was one of the biggest laughs that I had in the entire year, that terrible year of 2020, because that's when I saw this film, and it played brilliantly because of, we injected you with a deadly virus. No, we injected you with the flu. One of those. But Breakdown is the movie that I recommend if somebody says, give me a great Kurt Russell performance without telling me anything else, Breakdown. Give me a great thriller from the 90s. It's a film I've recommended dozens of times to people who like suspense films, thrillers. What's a good one with maybe people that I would recognize? Breakdown. And Breakdown is, I would say, the best realistic, and when I say realistic, meaning practical mechanical effects, and the character Kurt plays in that film, Jeff Taylor, he's tough, but he is not John McClane. He is not John Matrix, from Commando. He's not Dutch Schaefer from Predator. This is a regular, normal person. He's not even Chuck Norris. He's not Sylvester Stallone's Marion Cobretti. This is a regular guy in a situation that, well, he's fucked. He's in a strange town. He doesn't know anybody. His wife has been kidnapped because of a breakdown of his car, which couldn't have happened because it's a new car. There's no way that the car just up and died unless there is some kind of conspiracy, which, spoiler alert, of course there is. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a movie called Breakdown about a guy looking for his wife 5-10 minutes into the movie if there wasn't some kind of conspiracy. I think that his performance in that movie, it was never going to get any Best Actor buzz because they really don't nominate people in films such as that. And I really hate to speak poorly, even the slightest, about somebody I fucking love in Robert Duvall. But I thought Robert Duvall's Best Actor nomination for that year's The Apostle, I watched that movie. The movie's not that good. And I don't get why Duvall was nominated. He did better work in about 5 other films that he didn't get nominated for. So I feel as if nowadays, they're more likely to reward this kind of film that Breakdown is, which is, it's part chase thriller, part paranoia thriller, like it has the Marathon Man, the creeping dread and paranoia that everybody is out to get you, everybody's out to get me, where is my wife, and am I going to be able to, without any training, am I going to be able to take on these guys, these scumbags who have apparently some training to deal with regular people such as myself. And the way Kurt's character goes from meek, scared, to avenging angel, it is always believable, and man, does he sell it. He's so good in that film. And there are movies of his that are kind of cult films that I like but don't love. I like Big Trouble in Little China, again, John Carpenter. I like it. I don't love it. I feel like it has some dead spots, and if we're being honest, the special effects are a little bit too goofy and wonky. Some of the effects work, I feel like, needed a couple more passes, if we're being honest here. But that is a film which is very well remembered by history. The movie that he did with Goldie, this is unfortunate. The film that he did with Goldie, and I believe Ed Harris, that resulted in Kurt and Goldie, that's 40 years they've been together, Swing Shift. There is, or was, Jonathan Demme. I'm pretty sure Jonathan Demme directed that movie. I'm sorry if I got this wrong. But there is his original cut. The director's original cut apparently was just about a masterpiece. And for reasons unknown, the movie was cut to ribbons in the editing process. The director lost the cut, and the movie ended up not being a box office hit anyway. But that is a movie that I don't think that the original version has ever been released. I don't believe it's lost, but I don't think, to my knowledge, it's been released. I should have Googled this. But I've read extensively on the original version, and that it was one of the best films of the first part of the 80s, and then the release version it's just okay. But there is the romance angle with Kurt Russell's character and Goldie Hawn. And where I was going with that is a film that was remade not that long ago, which I think is just okay, but a lot of Gen Xers, it's one of their favorite comedies, is Overboard, where Kurt plays this kind of slob sort of guy, very similar character to what he played in Big Trouble in Little China, and who he would later play in Tango and Cash. But it's a funny film, and Kurt and Goldie, they just look like they belong together, on screen or off. It doesn't really even matter. But Kurt always has had the ability to match the energy of his co-stars and to instinctively know, because sometimes it's direction. Sometimes the director is urging the actor, less is more. Let's bring it down a notch. But other times, somebody who is well respected, such as Kurt, can pretty much author their own performance within normal parameters, of course, and ad-lib if they like. But just for reference, you look at Kurt Russell in two movies which were released not that far apart, 1988's Tequila Sunrise and 1989's Tango and Cash with, everybody's favorite, Sylvester Stallone. And Tequila Sunrise is a movie that is not entirely successful. It looks amazing. The cinematography is spectacular. The screenplay is good, and the performances, I think, are excellent. The film is challenging in the sense that the only character in the entire movie who is even reasonably nice is a drug dealer. And that's something that you don't really expect to see. The nicest character in the movie is Mel Gibson's drug dealer. Well, he's trying to not be a drug dealer anymore. He just wants to fall in love again, and with Michelle Pfeiffer, and kind of go from there. But Kurt in that film, the part was, this is so stupid, the part that he plays, Nick Freesia, he is obviously a very attractive FBI agent, slick back hair, got all the answers, and something that you don't see that often in cinema, and certainly not in that era. He's a guy who actually uses his good looks, his seductive ways, to get in with a restaurateur named Joanne Volinari, played really well by Michelle Pfeiffer, who was working feverishly in that era. She had Fabulous Baker Boys right around the same time. And it's something that you don't see that often in movies, where you have a guy getting with a girl just because he's trying to get information, or just because she's hot. Like, he doesn't feel anything for her, and we end up rooting for the drug dealer to sort of take her away from him. It's a little bit absurd, but that's the movie. You have all of these law enforcement people who are craven and awful, and you got the nicest, kindest, cuddliest drug dealer you would ever want to meet in Mel Gibson's Dale McCusick. So that's a film that Kurt really brings it. And he and Mel had terrific chemistry. They play lifelong friends. One guy ended up a drug dealer, the other guy ended up a lawman, but the backstory is that it should have been both of them ending up in prison, and Mel did not rat his friend out. And so he does feel, Kurt's character of Nick Freesia does feel, I got to try to protect this guy. If there's any way that I can get him, I feel like he's working on whatever the mechanics of the story are. It's really well done. And also, that's a film with yet another incredible performance from the late, great J.T. Walsh, who I should have mentioned is the primary villain. That's not really a spoiler. The primary villain of Breakdown. It's funny, I didn't make the connection until now. They kind of play, they're supposed to be on the same side, but they're in a sort of antagonistic scenario against one another, even though they're on the same side in Tequila Sunrise. But Tango and Cash is one of the solid gold guilty pleasure movies. If I'm naming top 10, it might make my top 10. Kurt and Sylvester Stallone are just so good together. The film is bonkers. The plot is ridiculous beyond almost anything that Stallone has done, aside from his other guilty pleasure movies of that decade, such as Over the Top, such as Cobra, such as Lockup, such as Rhinestone, and Sly just knocking out one guilty pleasure movie after another. But what they did in that film, which would have been a little bit unexpected, especially because Kurt played, oh, you see, I even forgot to mention, the character of Nick Freesia, who Kurt plays in Tequila Sunrise, the role was offered to Pat Riley. Do you know who Pat Riley is? If you're not a sportsman, maybe you don't. He was the coach of the Los Angeles Lakers when they won all those championships with Magic Johnson in the 80s. And the look that Kurt has, he's got the Pat Riley slick back hair. I mean, that would have been fucking great. I want to reboot The Matrix and have Pat Riley make a movie opposite Mel Gibson. Who else was in that? Arliss Howard, J.T. Walsh, Raul Julia, another late great. Raul Julia, Ann Magnuson as the ex-wife, Michelle Pfeiffer, as I said. Wow. But yeah, Pat Riley was going to play that. Pat Riley was going to play that role, and it ended up going to Kurt. Now, Kurt did a lot of films that I consider to be not entirely successful, but sort of showed that he was willing to go in different directions and take on problematic roles. And he did a film, I want to say it was about 2003, with Scott Speedman called Dark Blue, where he plays a really dirty cop, but he's just barely on the right side. I mean, when I say just barely, it came out not that long after Denzel got all the acclaim and the Best Actor hardware for Training Day. Kurt plays a similar cop, but he's not quite as awful as what Denzel does in Training Day. And it was just showing that Kurt was not going to play that many more conventional good guys, because he had a couple of movies where it was pretty just standard action hero stuff. And I love Executive Decision from '96 with John Leguizamo and, you know, everybody's favorite punching bag, no pun intended, Steven Seagal. Seagal and John Leguizamo barely had any scenes together, but Leguizamo and Seagal were constantly at odds. And Leguizamo was making fun of him, and Seagal probably was threatening to break his neck. But despite that, that's one of the best performances Seagal ever gave. It's a supporting role. And he showed that in the right kind of supporting role, he could be very effective. And Kurt is technically the lead. Halle Berry is in the film. Really, really good movie. I mean, it's kind of the most forgotten, great Die Hard on a, Die Hard in a, Die Hard with a. It's that sort of a story. It's about a commercial airliner 5 years before 9/11. A commercial airliner that's going to basically be blown up by a terrorist's bomb. It's really fucked up. You're not making that movie today. We know that. But a great film. And Kurt's performance, it's just, yeah, standard action hero stuff. But he gives a really good performance. Now, I am a big Quentin Tarantino fan. I don't love Death Proof. That's when Tarantino did the movie with Robert Rodriguez, and he had Death Proof, and Kurt plays stuntman Mike. And he's talked about how much he liked the experience of working with Tarantino, and Tarantino has always, you know, showered Kurt with bouquets of praise. I don't think the film, it's not that it isn't good, it's not up to the standard Tarantino, where even a lesser work, you can see it's a master filmmaker behind the camera. You can see it's a guy who every single shot is going to be just so. But in the Tarantino filmography, it's in the lower, you know, the lower rung out of his 9 movies, if you want to count that. It's not one of his better ones. I don't love Jackie Brown, but I think Jackie Brown is better than what he did there with Death Proof. But Kurt has, like, he doesn't really take that much time off. He did a great Western / horror film, I want to say it was about 10 years ago, called Bone Tomahawk. And I would say that's probably the last great movie that he was in, or great performance. I know a lot of people love Tombstone, and I'm not here to denigrate the film, but I've always felt that Lawrence Kasdan's Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner as Earp, Kurt plays Wyatt Earp in Tombstone, just for reference. I've always felt that Wyatt Earp was a better movie than Tombstone. And, you know, I mentioned Dennis Quaid about being maybe the best actor. He and Kurt, 2 of the best to never get any kind of a Best Actor Oscar nomination, either for supporting or lead. But everybody remembers Val Kilmer. You want to talk about a guy who should have been nominated for supporting actor. Val Kilmer in Tombstone is just a spectacular. Where was his nomination? But Dennis Quaid in Wyatt Earp is also absolute fire. He looks like he's dying. Because Dennis was lean and mean to begin with, and he dropped like 40 pounds. Man is like a walking corpse, a bone rack on screen. He's so thin and gaunt. But yeah, I don't really think that Kurt does all that much in Tombstone. It's Val Kilmer's show, and Val fucking kills it. But 1993, there was no room for Val to be nominated. Hell, there wasn't any room for Christopher Reeve for Remains of the Day. Where was his nomination? Yeah, the problem was you had Pete Postlethwaite in The Name of the Father. You had Leonardo DiCaprio, What's Eating Gilbert Grape. My guy, who should have won, John Malkovich in The Line of Fire. And the eventual winner, Tommy Lee Jones for The Fugitive. And I'm forgetting one of the other people. I apologize. But you get the idea that Kurt, even in a film such as Wyatt Earp, such as Tombstone, he's got the mustache. It's not an actor's movie, but he tries to add distinctive shadings to the character of Wyatt Earp. It's not the easiest character to play. There've been a lot of big hitters. I mean, Henry Fonda played Wyatt Earp, for Christ's sake. That's when you step into an iconic role, it's not the easiest thing. But I am an enormous fan. I have always been a fan. Going back to the first time I watched the TV show The Fugitive, that was with Clint Eastwood's old buddy, his war buddy, David Janssen. Google Kurt Russell, The Fugitive. So now I ain't going to show you the Harrison Ford movie. Kurt Russell was about 8 years old. I don't think that he had even been hired or contracted by Disney at this point. He guest starred on one of the most memorable episodes of the original TV series, The Fugitive. A great TV show. Like, that was too good for TV. And yes, the movie with Harrison Ford is terrific, but the TV show is really something, decades ahead of its time for the way it built tension. And of course, you know that Richard Kimball is innocent, but Kurt with that big, but kind of bigger, like with the eyes and the face. There are some people, when you see them as kids, you wouldn't automatically be able to connect to, yeah, you could sort of tell, but Kurt Russell at 8 years old looks the same. He just looks older and he's bigger now. You know, that's what she said. But a happy 74th birthday to a legit all-time great and number one as far as somebody who became a star when just a child, who had the most seamless move from child stardom to global box office star and cinematic icon. Happy 74th to Kurt Russell. This has been episode 470 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your early Monday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.